The Athletic dropped some serious bombshells regarding the Darryl Sutter and locker room situation last season, and we are going to take a good look at that today here on Locked On Flames.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I'm your host, Jess Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Locked On Flames. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube as well, so make sure you're subscribed, following, you know the deal. But today, we are going to be talking about the Athletics article that dropped, and anytime Katie Strang drops an article, I know it's going to be something pretty heavy and serious, but when Haley and Julian are involved, then that's when, it's time to get out our little notebooks and start writing. But before we dive into all of this, make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts, and we are free 99 on YouTube as well. Come stick around in the comment section. There are plenty of things that you're probably going to want to chime in on, and our comment section is there for you. And leave a little timestamp so I can go back and know what you're referring to when I'm in the comment section. But we're going to talk about the beginning of this season, right? I think it's so easy to forget that this past season, started off on such a high note. There wasn't a transition period. It looked like the Flames were just skipping that. They went 5-1-0, and which was a franchise best in their first 6 games. Things looked good. Everyone was clicking with each other on the ice. The chemistry looked good. The hockey they were playing, obviously, was good enough to win. And then they lost 7 in a row. After they lost that game, after that win against Pittsburgh, they didn't win 3 in a row again until March. So that was October, early November. And then you go November, December, January, February, March, 5 months without being able to win 3 in a row. That's pretty bad. It felt like it was a never-ending season, because you would think the Flames could get themselves up for a game, and they just couldn't. You would think that they would use some sort of motivation and this real underdog energy that they could have had about them to win and to go out there. But it was pretty obvious that that wasn't happening, and there was something much bigger going on. It was revealed that the Flames launched an internal investigation against Darryl Sutter because there were accusations of him getting physical with a player on the bench during a game. It doesn't say, who the player was out of respect for their privacy or who brought that accusation forward. So, it could have been a witness. It could have been the player themselves. But the player, the victim of this alleged kick, reportedly told league officials that were conducting this investigation that he didn't think Sutter crossed a line and he didn't want to escalate it. Okay, that's their right. They don't have to do anything. I'm not going to sit here and tell you why that's the wrong answer. I'm not going to sit here and tell you why that's the right answer. But I'm going to tell you that there is probably a fear of retaliation and being known as a quote-unquote softie. And how the league and players and former players act when players come forward and speak about their past experiences. This isn't anything new. We've seen it happen in the past, and I would say even fairly recently in, when was it, 2019, when Bill Peters was fired. And back to the story here. So this is when Sutter and Tree Living's relationship supposedly dissolved. This is when Tree Living was kind of, I'm going to assume, this is when he wanted to fire Sutter. Not only was the team doing very poorly, but there was just an internal investigation against your coach for being physical. Now, obviously, with the player saying they don't think the kick or whatever it was, the physicality didn't cross a line, but it was still there. Clearly, the player is admitting that. Like, there was a level of physicality, whatever it may have been, but that's there. So you already know that that is someone's response. And we already know, and we're going to talk about it next, about his tantrum that he threw while coaching the Kings, throwing chairs. I'm just saying, not very rational responses to when you're frustrated and angry. This really does feel like it was the time Tree Living probably went to Murray Edwards and said, hey, do you think we can get this guy out of here? No, that didn't happen. And you're not coming back from that. Like, you can't look me in the eye and say, yeah, as a player, I could move past my coach doing something like this, talking to us like this, and acting like this. So I'm sure I'm going to get told, you've never played competitive sports in your life. That is a lie. I have. And I don't know anything about sports, and I'm too soft for the game, and find a different sport to cover. I am just looking at things from an analytical point of view and not as a player, because I'm not a hockey player. I just cover it. And there's just certain things that shouldn't fly. And there are certain things that are so ingrained in this sport that need to be unlearned. And one of them is accepting a coach's misbehavior. But coming up next, we're going to talk about Darryl Sutter's reputation and some of the receipts of how he has acted in the past and how that more than likely spilled over into last season. But before we do that, I do want to take a quick break to talk to you about eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know if the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it is easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out with me today on today's episode of Locked On Flames. We are pushing through the off season. This is our last full week ahead of the draft. So, keep an eye out for trades or anything like that. I would make sure that you are following and turning on tweet notifications for legitimate hockey insiders, because with Twitter's verification process and, it's easy to get duped. We thought it was easy before. It's a lot easier now. But this is something that we have talked about on this show a lot. And I think that it is important to talk about it here again, because it helps paint a bigger picture, like the whole picture. He has the reputation of a hardo coach for a reason. He is known for bringing down the hammer and doing things his way. How many times did I reference the Kings players locking him out of his own locker room because they were so tired of him? I truly thought the Flames were going to have a moment like that this season because of how bad things were. Just from what we saw, from the outside of what they put on the ice what the coach was saying, what the players were saying, and reading somewhat between the lines. It was very clear there was something going on, and I fully expected that to happen. I expected a little mini rebellion during the season. I think that it happened after the season during exit interviews, and we're going to get to that too. But former player Justin Williams talked about Sutter throwing metal chairs out of the coach's office during an intermission against the Wild back in LA. And now I'm going to assume they were like the metal folding chairs, just because I wouldn't think like an office chair is necessarily metal, and I think they would specify metal. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in a room when big, heavy objects are getting flung around by an angry person. Justin Williams says the coaches, like the assistant coaches and the others, like training staff, were running out of the room. Is that a good work environment? Like, imagine your boss coming in because your presentation to another client went poorly, and they're just hucking around metal chairs. You truly have to think about it from that perspective, because that would not fly in any other setting. And Drew Doughty told The Athletic that he was afraid of Darryl Sutter. You don't want to be on his bad side. That is a direct quote from Drew Doughty. He said that when he was 23, he was scared of Darryl Sutter. That's a grown man, okay? 23 years old. You've been playing hockey your whole life. Basically, like probably 20 years at that point, right? You're afraid of your coach. Is that any way to play this game? Is that any way to win? And I know people are going to say, well, they won the Stanley Cup. Yes, they won the cup, but you know what? You shouldn't have to sacrifice and put up with the nonsense that they did in order for that to happen. You should be able to go into a locker room. I'm not saying the coach has to be like your best friend, but there should be a level of respect in between, like a happy medium of, you're here to do a job, I'm here to do a job. We both want the same goal. Let's get it done. No metal chairs flying, no scaring players. Like, this isn't a haunted house. He was also accused of being rude and hostile and nasty towards staff members, not just players. It was more than just the players. And there's a way, again, what I've had coaches that are, more lenient and more like soft with their approach, but they still, they're teaching you a lesson. And I've had coaches that come down with you with the hammer and say, you play out of position, you're on the sideline. I'll send your sub in. And they are both effective in different ways. You learn from both. And I've also had coaches that were just straight up nasty and horrible human beings that like just shouldn't be allowed to coach youth sports or be in any sort of leadership position. And I think if you are lashing out at your players, like it's one thing when it's like a motivational, like, get your crap together. There's 20 minutes left in this game. Do you see the way you played last period? What is wrong with you? Get it together. Like that, fine. But to berate other people because you're frustrated, projection is ugly. And it says a lot about a person who just goes around and projects like that. Come for me all you want in these comments, but I truly believe in any situation, if you are that volatile towards another human being who just happens to be in your path of destruction, you need to take a step back. And I think that that's exactly what happened in LA, in Calgary. It's that simple. He he ran his course, and yeah, I don't know. It's just it's ugly. That's exactly what it is. It's just ugly. But let's rewind a little bit here. He was also accused by a former player of not allowing players to eat on the plane rides home after losses. And he would apparently yell at like the stewardess, flight attendants, when they didn't move the cart away fast enough. If there's one thing I can't stand in this world, it is people being nasty towards like service employees, like retail employees, waiters and waitresses. Like that tells me all I need to know about you. And he's also accused of kicking a player in the back during a game. Did we not just talk about that like 10 minutes ago? I heard that. It just brings it back. This person deals with their frustrations in a not so productive way. Kicking players in the back, not great. Flinging metal chairs around, not great. Depriving players of food after probably burning like 1,200 calories during a game, not great. Being accused of it again, like 10 years later, not a good look. But when asked about it, Sutter texted, "It's pretty clear that everyone that knows me knows that none of that is true, and it's disappointing to hear. Thank you for that nothing burger, because I can't believe it." And this is the other thing. This is like not on the realm of his reputation, but just something that like speaks to his level of pettiness, passive aggression. With the playoffs on the line in that game against Nashville, he sent out Nick Ritchie during a shootout instead of Elias Lindholm or your goal scorer, or like your leading scorer, Tyler Toffoli. And at the end of the game, he said, yeah, it had no bearing on the outcome. Yeah, so I'm really glad that he is back in Viking on his farm and just not around this team or any team in any capacity. I will happily write him that $8 million check. I mean, it's not coming out of my account, and just see him off to the sunset. No more of that. And coming up next, we are going to wrap up the show with some quotes from the players and, of course, some more analysis, my opinions, my takes on just all of this. And thank you everyone so much for hanging out with me on today's episode of Locked On Flames. We are cruising through the summer. It is pretty much the end of June, and we're getting there. Free agency will be here before we know it. So you're going to make sure you want to make sure you are subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts. And of course, we're free on YouTube as well. Nick will be here with me tomorrow. We'll see if there's any trade updates on Noah Hannafin or any more rumblings on Elias Lindholm signing long term, or is Tyler Toffoli next? I don't know. But one thing that the players made clear was that Darryl Sutter was the problem. Supposedly 7 players requested trades. 7. Yeah, normally play like maybe you get 1 or 2 players that come to you at some point and are like, yeah, like I want out. And for 7 players to come to you and say, get me the heck out of here, I don't want to play here next season if he's the coach. You as an owner, as a general manager, obviously at that point, Brad Treliving was out, but as a leadership team the leadership team in your organization, you owe it to your players, your employees, to do what's right for them and what's in their best interest. That's something that should sit with a lot of people this off season and heading into next season, when you think about how bad it had to be for there to be an internal investigation for 7 players, up to 7 players request trades. Is that not funky to anyone? Anyways, there was another Blake Coleman quote in this article that I found to be a decent quote, really. More of it was the guys realizing what we had going was broken. Whether you like Darryl or you don't like Darryl, it was clear that something needed to change or it was going to be the exact same story. Conroy talked about his experience going to the rink and him going to work last season. And he was wondering if the players were having fun. It didn't look like it. And for Coleman to say, it was going to be the exact same story, something really had to change because it wasn't a good fit anymore. Some players or some coaches just run their course the same way some players do in organizations. Like players just get passed around like cheese trays at parties. Like it's a thing. It happens. Like I think about Hunter Renfroe in Major League Baseball. I think about, oh God, who's a player? Like I would say Phil Kessel, but Phil Kessel's actually like a really good hockey player, or was a really good hockey player. But like there are just players that Zach Aston Reese and Anders Bjork, like players like that just kind of plop around everywhere. They go where they're needed. But that just happens. It is natural, but it is unnatural for things to get to this level. For things to escalate to a point where players aren't having fun, where players are asking for trades, where general managers are asking you to fire this coach and you say no, for that coach to be under investigation. That is not normal. Things usually just get a little tense. They run its course and you move on. It did not get to that. It was ramped up to 150% in November when they started losing in that 7-game losing streak. It started happening then and there. And it just never stopped. Nikita Zadorov said that who I took as a Sutter guy. I think that he, did well under Darryl Sutter, and Sutter seemed to like him. He said Sutter just didn't fit the team anymore. And I think when you have your guy come out and say things like that, that's when it had to have been pretty dicey in there. And Mackenzie Weegar said on Missing Curfew, I'll be the first one to say it. I thought we also needed a coaching change. When someone who has the potential to be the heartbeat of your team is saying that in his first year here, you got to do something because you've locked him up for 8 years, I believe. 7, 8 years. And you just got to do something about that. And they did. The Calgary Flames fired Darryl Sutter, relieved Brad Treliving of his duties, went and hired Craig Conroy, who then brought in Ryan Huska, who then also brought in Jerome McGinley, and things are changing. Things feel about as far away from last year as they possibly could at this moment in the offseason. I'm not necessarily talking about the product on the ice because obviously we haven't seen any of that. But the vibes, those intangibles that everyone talks about, what's the room like? Does the coach have a good grip on the room? What are the vibes in the locker room? What, how did the coaches feel about the players? How did the players feel about the coaches? It is highly reported that Huska had an overwhelmingly positive review from players. And I talked about it last week, but Rasmus Anderson and talked about how much of an impact Ryan Huska has had on his development. And it's important to remember that when we're going into this season and when we get the product on the ice. There's probably going to be an adjustment period because there wasn't room for it last year. So don't be upset if the Flames go out and lose like 3 straight. There's 79 games remaining at that point. But thank you everyone for sticking around with me, hanging out with me. Whenever you're listening to this on Locked On Flames, I appreciate you. You can follow me on Twitter at Jess Belmosto, and you can follow the show at LO_FlamesPod. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, and of course on YouTube as well. Free 99. Like I said, comments, just be respectful, basically. If you're talking and kind of like live reacting, if you're watching, I know sometimes like I do that on certain videos, but yes, thank you for sticking around. We'll be here for you. It's your team every day as we just wait for Noah Hannafin to be traded, because that is more than likely happening. So we'll see when that happens. And thank you so much for sticking around.